Chapter 30. The golden rush of light erupted from Zelda's heart, igniting her skin in iridescent power that radiated from the tower, transforming the Hyrule Castle spire into a beacon of skyward luminescence, beckoning her forces on. Ganondorf was thrown from his feet, flung haphazardly on the bed, his thick wrists and ankles shackled by otherworldly rings that all of his beastly, wrathful lashing could not budge. The vermilion flame of his hair began to pulsate, snaking, foul tendrils whipping up the frame and posts, his eyes blazing with searing vengeance as her secret stone trembled in its setting upon his chest, fueling the Demon King's rise. Zelda stretched her neck and shoulders back, luxuriating in her untethered body as she made her way slowly across the floor, each step dappling pools of radiance along the stones. Within her ignited heart she carried every reincarnated goddess that had ever been, their stories and memories and histories and legends tangling and mingling into her own. Hands outstretched, seared by the Triforce, stolen and enchanted and trapped, a cascade of obsessions who were never, not once, his own. A coveted wind he could only pretend to possess as it stretched out to sea. She reached over the debilitated monster, her fingers wrapping around the stolen stone, flicking it free from the setting with her fingernail. In her palm the ancient gift sparkled with recognition of its true mistress. Her hair unfurled like trails of ivy, filling the expanse behind her with rays of curling, winding locks.
"Much better,"
she murmured, watching as the inferno of his amplified rancor sank and cooled like dying fire embers beneath her, leaving the mortal hollowed and diminished.
"Hylia,"
he snarled, his voice strained as she turned back to the mantle. The Master Sword was fit to burst with its beckoning blue light, rivaled only by her own radiance.
"Demise,"
she said as she reached up, guiding the mounted sword straight into her grip.
"You've failed once again."
The heft of the hilt, the blade almost weightless. The legendary longsword felt as if it was forged in her image, an extension of her form.
"Impossible. You can't,"
he cried out, incredulous, his voice laced with the unfamiliar jolt of his own fear clamping around his throat.
"Only the hero can wield that sacred sword."
She slid her fingers up and down the blade, the metal resisting her flesh.
"Oh, come now. After all of the grief you gave me, an idiot girl whose head was turned by gossip and stories, you let yourself believe a moldy legend?"
She chuckled, taking a moment to tug at the shackle around his left ankle, testing its immaculate strength. He made a sharp motion, an attempt to kick, reduced to a tremor engulfed by the holy binding.
"You, the cunning, unstoppable Demon King, brought the instrument conceived for your ruin into your sanctuary because an ancient legend eased away your fears. Made you think you were too smart, too safe, that you could render all that opposed you into trinkets and trophies? It did feel good, I'm sure, letting yourself believe that our heroes were dead."
Her visage hovered above him, letting the Master Sword dangle at her side.
"I shepherded this promise for 10,000 years, ruined and honed it in my light, granting fate my mind and soul for a chance that it would reach Link and destroy you, sacrificing every shred of my life at an infinitesimal shot that you'd be brought down, because even a Hyrule where I could not exist was better than one in which you could. And you thought, you believed, that this sword would not yield to my desires as its own. You're a fool,"
he murmured.
"Unfit to rule the demons left to starve and die as you lose, yet again." "And what will you rule over now, pet?"
he pressed, seizing on the last remnants of his triumphs, wringing salvation.
"A kingdom of Hylians who turned on you and your knight at the mere suggestion that they should. That pathetic life you hid in is gone. I burned your hovel to the ground and executed your hero. You'll have nothing and no one." "You did nothing,"
she corrected.
"For a man who claims he doesn't care for servants and minions, you certainly love to keep your hands clean. But there's an unfortunate hitch in sourcing out so much of your will, isn't there? Those lackeys just can't seem to get things quite right for you. And your oversight has grown so lazy, you overindulged beast."
She clasped the hilt with both hands and leaned forward, bathing his graying pallor in a respite of brilliant light.
"Did you even look at that heap of corpse before you claimed victory that night? Did you so much as pause to wonder why I'd asked you to burn him so quickly? And how did you imagine that I would ever forgive you, if I'd thought that the body was truly his?
The truth was slow to sink. Each sidestep and distraction over weeks and months pulled back like layers of skirt.
What was it you said to me when you tore me from my bed? Oh yes, so disappointing. And yet, so predictable.
She stood back up, making her way around the bed's corner with the gait of a ghost.
Do you remember that, darling? How much you hated the quiet, disarmed life you found when you attacked our helpless little house? I was too panicked to see through to what was right beneath that righteous indignation. It's only in your pathetic attempts to recreate the joy and beauty of Hyrule's halcyon days that I caught a whiff of your true, nibbling envy. But I understand, wanting so badly to claim that Link was gone and I was yours. It felt real, didn't it? Real enough to burrow in and let the serenity soften your nerves.
He went quiet then, perhaps the first silence he'd yielded in all of their familiarity. His smirk, the landscape of her world, collapsed into a grimace as the revelation settled and arranged around him, suffocating the citadel of his reality.
You couldn't even see the truth when I told it to you,
she went on.
I didn't send for an invasion, you rash, impulsive bastard. My hero did. All you've done now is ruin his surprise for both of us. So he returns at long last.
Ganondorf's head swiveled with a jerk, the animation of something already dead. The whites of his eyes had gone dull and glassy, closer to the rotten shell she'd found festering beneath her feet in the upheaval than her captor.
Tell me, princess, how will he be able to look at you now? You think you can conceal your nature to his notice? That you can stop what I awakened in you? Do you mean that I love to fuck you?
She sighed, taking hold of the far bedpost and drawing herself up onto the mattress, letting her sheep's wool slippers jangle the gold bound to Ganondorf's ankles as she inched forward up the length of his calves.
That's the real tragedy of your tale, isn't it? Because you were close. You were so close.
She drew out the syllables, mewing in condescension, as if comforting a petulant child who'd come in last in the race.
If you'd only been content with making me feel safe, like you promised,
she said, tilting down to brush her gleaming cheek from the bend of his knee to his muslin-bound hip, her billowing locks drawing a shudder as they skimmed his inner thigh, a frisson swallowed up by the power that bound him.
Your sweet, coddling possession. Oh, I craved it. More than I could have imagined, and so much more than I'd ever wish to admit. How it made me ache for the shortness of days to bring me closer to the night. The hours I spent lost in my imagination, plotting the next best way I could please you.
Her index and middle walked up the length of his cock, a lazy pantomime of can-can kicks that sent his spine straining against the otherworldly shackles, murderous fury crackling from between his gritted teeth.
There was a flicker of time tucked within that pleasure that you could have had me, when my body could have conspired against my heart, convinced that it belonged next to you, beneath you. Do you understand how nearly you'd won me? Your mere satisfaction was enough to bring me to my knees.
She rose up then, squeezing him ruthlessly between her knees, tossing her hair back to drape like a shroud.
The truth was unspeakable, but I knew it. I was bent to believe that fate intended me to be your queen.
Rocking forward, close enough for her entrance to meet the shaft straining against his trousers, but halting midair. Frustrated, fuming, he hurled his skull against the pillow, ricocheting into the backboard.
But that submission wasn't enough. You weren't content confining that dominance to a mere facet of our lives, as an intimacy all our own. In the depths of your hunger, your power could only be absolute. You were incapable of loving me because you were too obsessed with controlling me instead, and that's what I want you to think about,
she declared, raising the Master Sword high above her head.
In the next 100 incarnations of your doomed, miserable life.
She plunged the blade between his ribs, her entire body driving the gleaming steel shaft all the way down to the feathery mattress below.
Sever, my king,
she murmured, resting her forehead against the cooling handle as the light dimmed away and Hylia departed for the heavens, leaving her too fatigued to hear the rising screams burgeoning in the hall, or the swing of the door pried open by a dripping eightfold blade. She had just enough strength to open her eyes and meet the specter of Link framed in the entry's arch, his mask long discarded, his neck and jaw flecked with blood, raking his breaths as he searched desperately for any promise of life upon the bed.
Closely,
she breathed, the red-gloved arms catching her as she tipped forward off of the beast, lending her the heft of his muscle and steadying heartbeat as she finally came undone. End of chapter.